Hello! Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're diving into one of the wildest fan theories to ever hit the internet. And honestly, it's been absolutely mental watching it all unfold. We're talking about the Stranger Things Conformity Gate conspiracy, the theory that convinced thousands of fans that the series finale we watched on New Year's Eve wasn't actually the real ending. I'll be covering all the topics I can fit in for tonight, but there's definitely more to come if this turns out to be a multiple-part situation. So we'll start with what actually happened when the finale dropped on December 31st, 2025. Then we'll move on to the theory itself, all the evidence fans collected, the significance of the number 7, what Netflix and the Duffer Brothers have actually said, and what's really coming next for the Stranger Things universe. There's plenty to get talking about. From graduation poses that looked a bit too similar to Vecna's signature stance, to D&D books that supposedly spelled out secret messages, to the fact that Netflix literally crashed twice because so many people were refreshing the site waiting for episode 9. If you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, grab your Eggo waffles and a torch, get cozy in the upside down, and let's begin. So way before the theory took over the internet, we need to understand exactly how Stranger Things Season 5 was released. Because the whole rollout was pretty unusual. Netflix didn't just drop all the episodes at once like they normally do. Instead, they went for this staggered release that honestly felt a bit like torture for fans who'd already been waiting 3 years since Season 4 ended back in 2022. The first volume, which included episodes 1 through 4, dropped on November 26th, 2025. That's the day before Thanksgiving in the States, which made sense since Stranger Things has always had this connection to holiday releases. Volume 2, episodes 5 through 7, came out exactly a month later on Christmas Day, December 25th. And then after making everyone wait through the most stressful week of their lives, the finale arrived on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2025, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Episode 8 was titled The Right Side Up, which is a pretty clear callback to the Upside Down, obviously. The runtime was massive, clocking in at 2 hours and 8 minutes. That's basically a full-length film, which the Duffer Brothers had been promising for ages. They'd said the episodes would be like 8 movies, and to be fair, they weren't lying about the length. Now what's really interesting is that the finale also got a limited theatrical release. On the evening of December 31st and continuing through January 1st, 2026, you could actually watch the series finale in cinemas across the United States and Canada. This was proper event television, the kind of thing that doesn't happen very often anymore. I mean, think about it. When's the last time a TV show got a theatrical release for its finale? It's usually the other way round, with films ending up on streaming platforms. The release itself was chaotic. Netflix's bandwidth had been increased by 30% specifically to handle the premiere of Volume 1, but the site still crashed shortly after the episodes went live. Apparently, the demand was just that massive. And then it happened again with the finale. Netflix went down for a bit on New Year's Eve because so many people were trying to watch at the exact same time. Peak Netflix logic, honestly. You'd think after the first crash they'd have sorted it out, but apparently not. The immediate reaction to the finale was, to put it mildly, divisive. Some fans absolutely loved it. They thought it was a beautiful, emotional ending that wrapped up the story in a satisfying way. Others were proper disappointed, feeling like the ending was too neat, too happy, or left too many questions unanswered. There was this massive split on social media within hours of the episode dropping. Fun fact, one of the episodes earlier in Volume 2 initially remained titled Chapter 2, The Vanishing of, on Netflix's season page when it first went live. But when you actually watched it, the opening credits revealed the full title, Chapter 2, The Vanishing of Holly Wheeler. It was this weird little glitch that got people talking, though it was probably just a last-minute spoiler protection thing that Netflix forgot to update properly. But the real controversy centered on what actually happened in that finale. A lot of fans felt blindsided by certain character fates, particularly Eleven's. The epilogue, which took up about 40 minutes of the 2-hour runtime, showed the Hawkins crew graduating from high school and seemingly moving on with their lives. For a show that had always been about fighting monsters and defying impossible odds, this felt almost too normal to some viewers. Too conformist, if you will. And that word, conformity, is what ended up defining the entire conspiracy theory that followed. Fans started picking apart the episode frame by frame, looking for inconsistencies, hidden meanings, Easter eggs, anything that might suggest the ending they'd watched wasn't the real ending at all. Within 24 hours of the finale airing, the term conformity gate was trending on Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, pretty much everywhere. The theory had begun. To be honest, I can understand the disappointment. After investing 9 years in a show, after growing up alongside these characters, for some viewers, getting an ending that feels off-brand would be genuinely upsetting. Whether the ending was actually off-brand or not is debatable, but the emotional response was very real. Now, I'd mentioned briefly that the finale left fans divided, but let's actually cover what happened in episode 8. Because understanding the ending is crucial to understanding why people think it's fake. If you're going to claim something is an illusion, you need to know what you're working with first. The episode opens with the gang putting together their final plan to rescue the missing children who'd been taken by Vecna. By this point in Season 5, Hawkins is under military quarantine, the rifts are still open from the end of Season 4, and Vecna has basically vanished. Nobody knows where he is or what he's planning, which creates this really tense atmosphere throughout the early episodes. The actual final battle is massive. It involves basically everyone we've come to know over the past 9 years, all working together in what the Duffer Brothers called the full party, standing together one last time. There's this coordinated attack where different groups are handling different aspects of the plan. Some are going after Vecna directly, others are trying to close the rifts, and there's a whole subplot about getting the kidnapped children out safely. According to the episode itself, Joyce Byers is the one who ultimately kills Vecna. Or at least, she's the one who strikes the killing blow. It happens in this cave-like location in the Upside Down, and there's a lot of emotional weight to it because Joyce has been fighting to protect her kids, and Hawkins since, literally, the first episode of the series. Having her be the one to end it felt thematically appropriate to a lot of viewers. But here's where things get complicated, and this is the bit that really fueled the conspiracy theories. Eleven sacrifices herself to close the rifts permanently. She uses her powers in this final massive display of strength, and the implication is pretty clear that she's dying or has died in the process. The scene is absolutely heartbreaking, with Mike holding her, telling her he loves her, the whole works. Except the show doesn't actually confirm whether she's dead or alive. The ending is deliberately ambiguous about Eleven's fate, which is what's driven so many fans mental. After the battle, there's a time jump forward, and we get this extended 40-minute epilogue showing the Hawkins crew at their high school graduation. Everyone else gets pretty clear happy endings. Lucas and Max are still together, and Max has fully recovered from her injuries in Season 4, which is lovely to see. Dustin is thriving at college, studying some kind of science program. During the final D&D session, Mike narrates what he imagines as Will's future. Living in New York City with a boyfriend, finally getting to be openly himself after his coming out arc earlier in the season. Whether this is what actually happened or just Mike's hopeful vision for his friend isn't entirely clear. Steve ended up with someone, though I won't spoil who for those who haven't watched yet. Nancy is pursuing journalism, as she always wanted, but not everyone made it through the final battle. Kaylee, Eleven's sister from Season 2, died during the confrontation with Vecna, either shot during the fight or killed in the explosion that followed. Her death was one of the casualties that made the "everyone gets a happy ending" epilogue feel particularly jarring to some viewers. But Mike is grief-stricken. Throughout the entire epilogue, Finn Wolfhard plays him as someone who's lost the most important person in his life. He's there at graduation, he's going through the motions, but you can see he's not really present. He's stuck in his memories of 11, unable to move forward the way everyone else has. The final scene brings everyone back to the basement, where it all began in Season 1. They're playing Dungeons and Dragons again, just like they used to, It's meant to be this beautiful bookend to the series, showing that despite everything they've been through, they're still the same group of friends at their core. The camera focuses on the dice, which shows a 7, and then we get a shot of what's meant to be the Stranger Things player's manual sitting on the table. It's emotional, it's nostalgic, and for a lot of people, it felt like a perfect ending. But for others, it felt wrong. Too neat, too happy for everyone except Mike, too conformist in a show that had always been about resisting conformity and fighting against oppressive systems. The graduation scene in particular struck people as odd. All the students are sitting in rows, wearing these orange and purple graduation gowns, and they've all got their hands folded in this very specific way. Some fans immediately clocked that the pose looked eerily similar to how Henry Creel, who became Vecna, used to sit. It's this very formal, very rigid posture, with hands clasped in front. There are other weird little details scattered throughout the epilogue. Props that seem to change colours between shots, continuity errors that don't quite add up, characters referencing things that don't match what we saw in earlier seasons. On their own, these could just be mistakes, the kind of thing that happens in any big production. But when you add them all together, especially if you're already suspicious of the ending, they start to look like clues. Fun fact that a lot of people missed is that the epilogue's tone is completely different from the rest of the episode. The first hour and a half is intense, dark, scary, with real stakes and consequences. Then suddenly, it shifts to this warm, golden-lit, almost dreamlike sequence where everything is fine and everyone is moving on. The tonal whiplash was jarring enough that even fans who liked the ending admitted it felt a bit abrupt. To be honest, I can see both sides. If you loved the characters and wanted them to have happy endings, the epilogue delivers that. But if you were invested in the darker, more complex storytelling that Stranger Things had been building toward, especially in seasons 3 and 4, the sudden shift to, and they all lived happily ever after, except Mike who's sad, might feel unsatisfying. The ambiguity around Eleven's fate is the real kicker though. In season 1, the show did something similar. Eleven appeared to die at the end, dissolving into particles after defeating the Demogorgon. Then the very last scene showed Hopper leaving Eggos in a box in the woods, suggesting she might still be alive. And of course, she was. Season 2 revealed she'd been hiding with Hopper the whole time, so fans have precedent for the Duffer Brothers faking out Eleven's death. It's happened before, why couldn't it happen again? And that suspicion, that feeling that something was off, is what kicked off the biggest fan theory in Stranger Things history. Conformity Gate is probably one of the most elaborate fan theories I've seen in years, and honestly, the creativity behind it is pretty impressive, even if it turned out to be completely wrong. The name itself tells you everything you need to know about what fans believed was happening. Conformity Gate. The theory argued that the ending we watched, particularly that 40-minute epilogue, represented a kind of forced conformity that went against everything Stranger Things had stood for over 9 years. The show had always been about misfits, outcasts, and people who refused to fit into neat little boxes. It was about kids who played Dungeons and Dragons when it wasn't cool, about a girl with superpowers who'd escaped a government lab, about a boy who came back from another dimension, about fighting against authority and questioning what you're told is normal. So, to have an ending where everyone is sitting in perfect rows at graduation, wearing matching gowns, moving on with their lives in this very conventional way, struck a lot of fans as deeply suspicious. It felt like the exact opposite of what the show had been building toward. And that's where the conspiracy theory really took root. According to Conformity Gate believers, Episode 8 wasn't the real ending at all. It was an illusion, a carefully constructed, fake reality created by Vecna. The theory claimed that Joyce hadn't actually killed Vecna in that cave. Instead, Vecna had won. He'd trapped everyone, maybe even the audience, in this false reality where everything seemed fine on the surface, but was actually a nightmare of conformity and control. The core argument went like this. Vecna's entire power set revolves around creating illusions and manipulating reality. We'd seen him do it throughout Season 4, trapping people in their worst memories, twisting their perceptions, making them see things that weren't real. In the finale, he'd supposedly taken that power to its ultimate conclusion by creating an entire false reality, one where he'd won and reshaped the world into his vision of order and conformity. In this theory, the real finale, episode 9, would be the moment when the illusion shattered. The characters would realize they were trapped, they'd break free, and we'd get the actual ending where they truly defeat Vecna and escape his constructed reality. It would be dark, it would be intense, and it would be thematically consistent with what the show had always been about. What made the theory so compelling to believers was how well it aligned with the show's themes. Stranger Things has always been about breaking cycles, defying control, and resisting oppression. Eleven's entire character arc is about escaping the people who want to use her as a weapon and finding her own identity. Will's story is about refusing to be defined by trauma or by other people's expectations. The whole gang is built on the idea of standing together against systems that want to break them down. Having an ending where everyone just accepts their fate and moves on with normal lives felt antithetical to that. It felt like the characters had given up, conformed, stopped fighting. And in a show where the main villain literally uses mind control, that suspicious conformity looked an awful lot like evidence of Vecna's influence. The precedent from season 1 only strengthened the theory. The Duffer Brothers had already faked Eleven's death once before. They deliberately made viewers think she was gone, only to reveal in the final moments that she might still be alive, and then in season 2 confirmed she absolutely was. So they had form for this kind of narrative trickery. Why wouldn't they do it again, but on a much larger scale? I mean, think about it from a storytelling perspective. The season 1 fake-out worked because it subverted expectations while still feeling emotionally true. The season 5 fake-out, if it existed, would do the same thing, but at the level of the entire series. It would be the ultimate twist, the kind of thing people would be talking about for years. Fans also pointed to the way Vecna's illusions had worked in earlier episodes. When he trapped people, he didn't show them obvious nightmares. He showed them twisted versions of reality where something was just slightly off. The colours were wrong, or familiar places were arranged differently, or people acted in ways that didn't quite match their personalities. It was subtle, insidious, designed to make the victim question what was real. And that's exactly what the finale felt like to Conformity Gate believers. It was reality, but slightly wrong. The characters were themselves, but slightly off. Everything was fine, but in a way that didn't feel earned. It was the perfect Vecna illusion, scaled up to encompass an entire epilogue. The theory also gained traction because of how the Duffer Brothers had talked about the ending in interviews before the season aired. They'd said it would be controversial, that not everyone would be happy with it, that it would spark debate. When the finale actually dropped and did spark massive debate, fans took that as confirmation that the controversy was intentional. The Duffer Brothers knew people would be divided because they deliberately created a fake ending designed to fool half the audience. What's really interesting is how quickly the theory spread. Within 24 hours of the finale airing, Conformity Gate was everywhere. TikTok videos breaking down the evidence, Reddit threads compiling clues, Twitter threads analysing every frame. It wasn't just a fringe theory that a few people believed. This was a massive movement with thousands, possibly tens of thousands, of people convinced that episode 9 was real and coming soon. Part of what made it so believable was the sheer amount of supposed evidence that fans found. And we'll get into all of that in detail, because honestly, some of it is pretty compelling if you're already primed to believe the theory. But the foundation of Conformity Gate wasn't really about evidence. It was about emotion. Fans didn't want to believe the story ended the way it did. They didn't want Eleven to be dead or in limbo. They didn't want Mike to spend the rest of his life grieving. They didn't want all these characters they'd grown up with to just move on and be normal. That's not the ending they'd imagined during 3 years of waiting. And when the actual ending didn't match their expectations, the theory offered hope that maybe, just maybe, the real ending was still coming. To be honest, I can't really blame people for wanting that. When you invest 9 years in a story, When you grow up alongside these characters, when you've spent literal years theorizing about how it would all end, getting something that feels wrong is genuinely devastating. The theory wasn't just about plot holes or Easter eggs. It was about fans refusing to accept that the story they loved had ended in a way that disappointed them. And that emotional core is what made Conformity Gate so powerful and ultimately so hard to let go of, even when all the evidence suggested it wasn't real. So the first major piece of evidence that fans pointed to was actually pretty creepy when you look at it: the graduation scene. And I'm not talking about the overall vibe or the tone. I'm talking about something very specific that hundreds of people noticed independently within hours of the finale airing. In the graduation ceremony, there's this long sequence where the camera pans across rows of students sitting in the audience. They're all wearing their orange and purple gowns, waiting for their names to be called, doing what you'd expect at a graduation. But what caught people's attention was the way they were sitting. Nearly all of them had their hands folded in the exact same way, resting in their laps, fingers interlaced in this very precise, very formal posture. Now, on its own, that's not necessarily weird. People at formal ceremonies often sit similarly. But long-time Stranger Things viewers immediately recognised that specific pose. It's how Henry Creel sits. Throughout Season 4, whenever we see flashbacks of young Henry before he became Vecna, he's often shown sitting with his hands folded in exactly that way. It's this rigid, controlled posture that signals something is fundamentally wrong with him even before his powers fully manifest. The comparison screenshots started flooding social media almost immediately. Fans would post a still from the graduation scene next to a still of young Henry Creel, and the similarity was honestly quite striking. Same hand position, same rigid posture, same almost eerie formality. And it wasn't just one or two students in the background, it was rows and rows of them, all sitting the exact same way. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. That pose isn't just associated with Henry Creel. It's also how Billy Hargrove sat when he was under the Mind Flayer's control in Season 4. There's a scene at the community pool where Billy's clearly being influenced, and he's sitting with his hands folded in that exact same way. The show had already established that specific posture as a visual indicator of mind control or possession. So when fans saw an entire graduation ceremony full of students sitting like that, their alarm bells went off. To believers of Conformity Gate, this wasn't coincidence. This was the Duffer Brothers deliberately planting a visual clue that everyone in that epilogue was under Vecna's influence. They were all being controlled, all conforming to his vision of how reality should be. I mean, when you think about it from that perspective, it is quite chilling. The idea that what looks like a normal, happy graduation is actually a room full of people under mind control, all moving and sitting in sync like puppets. That's proper horror movie stuff, and it fits perfectly with Stranger Things' established visual language. Some fans even went frame by frame through the graduation scene, counting how many students were sitting in that pose. The number was staggeringly high. We're talking about easily 80 or 90% of the visible students all positioned identically. For a scene that's supposed to represent freedom and moving forward with life, that level of uniformity felt deeply wrong. Then there's the graduation gowns themselves. One particularly viral TikTok video pointed out that the orange and purple colour scheme, combined with the way everyone was sitting in rows, made the students look less like graduates and more like prisoners in uniforms. The colours are bright and cheerful, sure, but the overall effect, especially with everyone posed identically, created this unsettling impression of conformity and control. To be honest, I can see what they mean. There's something about rows of people in matching outfits all sitting the exact same way that does trigger that uncanny valley response. It looks almost right, but not quite, which is exactly how Vecna's illusions have always worked in the show. But the visual evidence didn't stop with the graduation scene. Fans started picking apart other elements of the epilogue, and they found loads of what they considered to be continuity errors or deliberate inconsistencies. One of the biggest was the voltage dial. There's a scene earlier in the season where a specific voltage dial is prominently featured, and it's clearly one colour. But in the finale, that same dial appears to be a completely different colour. Fans posted side-by-side comparisons showing the discrepancy, and it was pretty obvious that something had changed. Now, this could just be a lighting issue or a genuine continuity error. Productions. This big always have a few mistakes that slip through, but conformity gate believers argued it was intentional, a callback to how Vecna's illusions work. When he traps people in false realities, there are always small details that are slightly off. Colours that don't quite match, objects that aren't where they should be. It's how the characters figure out they're in an illusion. The voltage dial changing colours perfectly mirrored that pattern. It was a visual clue, deliberately planted by the Duffer Brothers, showing that the reality we were watching wasn't quite right. And fans pointed out that Holly Wheeler had used similar colour discrepancies to navigate through Vecna's illusions earlier in the season. She'd noticed when things didn't match up, and that's how she found her way out. The finale was supposedly doing the same thing, giving us clues to spot the illusion. There were other prop inconsistencies too. Doors that seemed to face different directions between shots, objects on shelves that appeared to move or change, books that were arranged differently from one scene to the next. On their own, again, these could all just be production errors. But when you compile them all together, especially if you're already convinced the ending is fake, they start to look like a pattern. Fun fact, fans created entire spreadsheets documenting every single continuity error they could find in the finale. We're talking about dozens of supposed discrepancies, all meticulously catalogued with timestamps and screenshot evidence. The level of detail was honestly impressive, if slightly obsessive. One particularly weird one that kept getting mentioned was Holly Wheeler and the spinning wheel. Earlier in Season 5, there's a scene where Holly sees a spinning wheel that's a specific colour, but fans claimed that in a later reference or callback, the colour was wrong. It didn't match what we'd seen before. And since Holly's entire role in the season involved navigating through false realities and spotting when things were off, having her associated with a colour discrepancy felt significant. Then there's possibly the funniest piece of evidence in the entire conformity gate conspiracy, the Wheeler family hair situation. I'm not even joking about this one. It's absolutely mental, but fans were deadly serious about it. In the epilogue, several fans noticed that the Wheeler family, Mike, Nancy, Holly, and their parents Ted and Karen, all seemed to have hair that was styled or coloured in a way that resembled Henry Creel's hair. Specifically, they all had this sort of similar sandy brown colour and styling that matched young Henry from the flashbacks. One fan posted a compilation of screenshots showing the entire Wheeler family with their Season 5 finale hair next to images of young Henry Creel, and wrote something like, "This cannot be a coincidence that they decided to make Mike's whole family basically have Henry's hair." The implication being that Vecna had somehow altered their appearances in his constructed reality, marking them as part of his illusion. I mean, honestly, this one feels like a bit of a stretch to me. Hair colour and styling can change between seasons, actors' natural hair changes, and the Wheeler family has always had fairly similar colouring because they're, related. But for people who were already convinced that every detail mattered, even the hair became evidence. What made all of this visual evidence so compelling to believers was the sheer volume of it. It wasn't just one or two weird things, it was dozens of supposed clues, all pointing in the same direction. The more you looked, the more you found, which created this feedback loop where people became increasingly certain they were onto something real. The visual inconsistencies also played into a larger theory about how we, as the audience, were meant to be experiencing the finale. Some fans argued that we weren't just watching the characters be fooled by Vecna's illusion, we were experiencing it ourselves. The errors and glitches were meant to make us question what we were seeing, to make us uncomfortable, to prime us for the reveal in episode 9 that none of it was real. It's actually quite a sophisticated reading of the text, even if it turned out to be completely wrong. The idea that the Duffer Brothers would create an intentionally flawed, unsettling finale as a way of communicating that it's an illusion is genuinely clever storytelling. It would have been bold, experimental, and unlike anything else on television. But of course, the visual clues were just the beginning. Fans also found narrative inconsistencies, symbolic evidence, and patterns in the storytelling itself that they claimed proved the ending was fake. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because fans started finding inconsistencies in the story itself, not just the visuals. And these narrative discrepancies were actually harder to dismiss as simple production errors, because they involved things characters said and did, specific plot points that didn't quite add up. The biggest one that kept getting mentioned was Will Byers' birth date. Throughout the series, Will's birthday has been a bit of a running joke in the fandom, because the show itself has been inconsistent about it. But in the Season 5 finale, there's apparently a reference or mention that contradicts what had been established in earlier seasons. Fans who'd been tracking these details for years immediately spotted it, and it became one of the central pieces of evidence. The argument went like this: if the Duffer Brothers are normally so meticulous about continuity, why would they get something as basic as a main character's birth date wrong in the series finale? Unless it wasn't wrong at all. Unless it was a deliberate clue that we were watching a false reality where memories and facts had been scrambled. Characters also seemed to misremember events from earlier seasons. There were lines of dialogue where someone would reference something that happened before, but the details would be slightly off from what we actually saw. It's the kind of thing that could easily be chalked up to imperfect memory or dialogue that wasn't fact-checked properly. But for conformity gate believers, these weren't mistakes, they were breadcrumbs. One specific example that got loads of attention was Will's coming out speech. At some point during the epilogue, Will talks about going for milkshakes at Melvald's with someone. The problem? Melvald's is a general store. It's been shown multiple times throughout the series as a general store where Joyce worked, where people buy supplies, where the kids sometimes hang out. It's never been depicted as a place that serves milkshakes. But here's where the theory gets properly elaborate. Fans discovered that in the 1950s, during Henry Creel's childhood, Melvald's actually was a diner. It served food and drinks before eventually becoming a general store. So when Will mentions getting milkshakes there, he's describing something that would have been possible in Henry's timeline, not in the present day. This led to what some fans called the mixed memories theory. The idea was that Vecna wasn't just creating an illusion of the present, he was blending memories and realities from different time periods. Characters were experiencing a mix of their own memories and Henry Creel's memories, which is why details from the past were bleeding into the present. Will couldn't have gotten milkshakes at Melvald's in the 1980s, but Henry could have in the 1950s. One particularly dedicated fan on Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it, now wrote this whole thread arguing that the audience was part of the story, that we, as viewers, were experiencing the same mixed memories that the characters were. Vecna had somehow trapped us in the illusion too, which is why we were seeing these blended realities. It was meant to be disorienting, meant to make us question what was real. The thread used examples like Holly seeing the wrong colour spinning wheel, Will's milkshake comment, and other timeline inconsistencies as evidence that we were experiencing what the person called Vecna's master illusion. The theory suggested that in episode 9, we'd realise along with the characters that we'd been fooled, that we'd been seeing a constructed reality this whole time. It's absolutely wild when you think about it, but also kind of brilliant from a storytelling perspective. Meta-narratives, where the audience is part of the story, aren't exactly new, but applying it to Stranger Things in this way would have been genuinely innovative. Then there's the D&D books. In the final scene, when everyone's gathered in the basement playing Dungeons and Dragons, there's a stack of D&D manuals and books visible on the table or nearby. Fans noticed that if you looked at the spines of the books in a specific order, the letters spelled out X a lie, as in Dimension X is a lie. Now, Dimension X is this realm that's connected to the Upside Down, part of the larger mythology that Season 5 had been exploring. If Dimension X was a lie, if that whole aspect of the resolution was fake, then presumably the entire ending was fake. The characters thought they'd closed the rifts and defeated Vecna by dealing with Dimension X, but actually, none of it was real. I've seen the screenshots and honestly, I can sort of see it. The letters do seem to line up in a way that could spell that out, though it also requires you to look at the books in a very specific order and ignore certain letters that don't fit the pattern. It's one of those things where if you're looking for it, you'll find it, but it's not exactly obvious. What's really interesting is how all these clues fed into each other. The visual inconsistencies suggested something was wrong with reality. The narrative inconsistencies suggested memories and timelines were scrambled. The symbolic clues like the D and D books suggested the resolution itself was false. Together, they created this elaborate web of evidence that felt comprehensive and convincing if you were already predisposed to believe. Fans also pointed to something really odd that happened with Netflix's search function. If you typed fake ending into Netflix's search bar, Stranger Things was apparently the only show that came up in the results. People took screenshots of this and shared them widely as proof that even Netflix's algorithm knew the ending was fake. Of course, this is almost certainly because of the sheer volume of people searching for Stranger Things fake ending and discussing Stranger Things fake ending online, which would naturally cause the Netflix algorithm to associate those terms with the show. But for believers, it was too perfect to be a coincidence. Netflix was in on it, they argued. The algorithm was dropping hints. Then there's Jamie Campbell Bower, who plays Vecna. He did an interview on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon on January 6, 2026, just one day before the theorized Episode 9 release date. In the interview, fans noticed that he never referred to Episode 8 as the finale. He kept calling it Episode 8, or the last episode we saw, but he specifically avoided using the word finale. For people who were already convinced that Episode 9 was coming, this felt like confirmation. Bauer knew there was another episode. He couldn't call Episode 8 the finale because it wasn't actually the finale. He was being careful with his language to avoid spoiling the surprise. In reality, this is probably just how he naturally spoke about it. Or maybe he was being intentionally vague because actors often are when discussing endings. But in the context of Conformity Gate, every word choice became evidence. The symbolic argument was perhaps the most emotionally compelling part of the theory. Stranger Things has always been about resisting conformity, fighting against systems of control, and refusing to be defined by other people's expectations. Eleven's entire arc is about escaping the lab that wanted to use her as a weapon and finding her own identity. Will's story is about surviving trauma and coming out on his own terms. The show has consistently championed outsiders, misfits, and people who don't fit in. So to have an ending where everyone is literally sitting in rows, wearing matching outfits, moving on with conventional lives, felt like a betrayal of everything the show stood for. It felt like the characters had given up and accepted conformity, which is exactly what Vecna would want. He's always been about imposing order, creating his vision of a perfect world, controlling how people think and behave. The theory argued that the finale's message of conformity and acceptance wasn't the real ending. It was Vecna's ending. It was his illusion of how the world should be, with everyone in their place, following the rules, not questioning or resisting. The real Episode 9 would show the characters breaking free from that conformity and fighting back one last time. It's a reading of the show that makes thematic sense, even if it's not actually what the Duffer Brothers intended. And that's what made Conformity Gate so powerful. It wasn't just about spotting Easter eggs or continuity errors. It was about fans feeling like the ending they got didn't match the story they'd been following for 9 years. Let's talk about one of the biggest pieces of evidence that convinced people Episode 9 was real, the number 7. And this one is actually quite compelling even if you're skeptical of the whole theory, because the symbolism is pretty much undeniable. Way back in Season 1, Episode 1, the very first episode of Stranger Things, there's a scene that becomes hugely significant when you look at it alongside the series finale. The boys are in Mike's basement playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is how the entire show begins. They're fighting a Demogorgon in the game, and Will Byers needs to roll the dice to attack. He rolls, and it lands on 7. Mike tells him it's not enough, And Will says one of the most memorable lines from the pilot, "The Demogorgon, it got me." Of course, we all know what happens next. Will vanishes that same night, taken by a real Demogorgon into the Upside Down, and the entire series kicks off from there. That dice roll of 7 becomes this haunting bookend to Will's disappearance. The number 7 is literally the first significant thing that happens in the entire show. Fast forward to the series finale, 9 years later. The final scene shows the gang back in that same basement, playing Dungeons and Dragons just like they used to. The very last shot before the credits roll focuses on the dice sitting on the table, and what number is showing? 7. It's right there, impossible to miss, clearly intentional. The parallel is beautiful from a storytelling perspective. The show begins with Will rolling a 7 and being taken by the Demogorgon. It ends with the dice showing 7 again, coming full circle. It's meant to be this poetic callback, showing that despite everything they've been through, they're still the same group of friends, still playing the same game. But for Conformity Gate believers, it meant something else entirely. They saw that 7 as a clue, a promise, a date. January 7th, 2026. The logic went like this. Every volume of Season 5 had been released on a major holiday. Volume 1 dropped on November 26th, the day before Thanksgiving in the United States. Volume 2 came out on Christmas Day, December 25th. The finale aired on New Year's Eve, December 31st, all holidays. So if there was going to be a secret episode 9, it would drop on a holiday too. January 7th, 2026 is Orthodox Christmas. For those who follow the Orthodox Christian calendar, Christmas falls on January 7th rather than December 25th. It's a major holiday for millions of people worldwide, and it fit perfectly with the pattern Netflix had established. Fans convinced themselves that the Duffer Brothers had planned this from the beginning, one final holiday release to cap off the series. The number 7 showing up in both the first and last episodes couldn't be a coincidence, they argued. It was a clue pointing to January 7th as the real release date for the real finale. The dice was literally telling us when episode 9 would drop. I mean, when you lay it out like that, it does sound quite convincing. The symbolism is definitely there, the pattern makes sense, and the Duffer Brothers are absolutely the kind of showrunners who would plan something that elaborate. But then it got even more elaborate. Remember that interview Jamie Campbell Bower did on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon on January 6th? Well, fans noticed that the clip from the show was posted to social media at exactly 10:07 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 10-07, which can be read as either October 7th in American date format, or more relevantly, as containing the numbers 10 and 7, or even just highlighting the 07 at the end. And the clip itself, exactly 1 minute and 7 seconds long. 107. There's that number 7 again. In the clip, Bauer is talking about Vecna and the finale, and at one point he says, "Tomorrow it begins." Now the interview aired on January 6th, so tomorrow would be January 7th. Fans absolutely lost their minds over this. He's telling us, they said. He's dropping hints. Tomorrow, January 7th, it begins. Episode 9 is coming. To be honest, "Tomorrow it begins" is quite an ominous thing to say the day before the theorized release date. It's the kind of phrase that's vague enough to mean anything but specific enough to fuel speculation. Whether Bauer was intentionally playing into the theory or just making a dramatic comment about something completely unrelated, it had the desired effect. People were convinced. The timestamp being 10:07 and the clip being exactly 1:07 long felt like too much to be coincidence. Surely someone at The Tonight Show, or NBC, or wherever, was coordinating these numbers deliberately. The level of planning that would require is actually quite impressive when you think about it. So you've got the dice showing 7 in the finale, pointing to January 7th. You've got Orthodox Christmas giving you a holiday to match the pattern. You've got Bauer's interview with 7s hidden in the timestamp and runtime. You've got "Tomorrow it begins" being said on January 6th. All of it seemed to be pointing to one inevitable conclusion. January 7th, 2026, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Episode 9 would drop on Netflix. Fans started planning viewing parties. People set alarms. Discussion threads went up across Reddit, TikTok, and Twitter with countdowns to the supposed release time. The energy was absolutely electric. People were convinced they'd cracked the code, that they'd figured out what the Duffer Brothers had hidden in plain sight. And then when the clock struck midnight on January 7th in different time zones around the world, fans started refreshing Netflix obsessively, constantly. Thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, all hitting refresh on the Stranger Things page at the same time, waiting for episode 9 to appear. The site couldn't handle it. Netflix crashed again. Just like it had crashed for the premiere and for the finale, it went down under the sheer weight of people desperately searching for an episode that, as it turned out, didn't exist. January 7th, 2026 came and went, and spoiler alert, there was no episode 9. The morning started with people checking Netflix the moment they woke up. Different time zones meant the anticipation rolled across the globe in waves. Fans in Australia and Asia were checking first, then Europe, then the Americas. Social media was absolutely buzzing with people reporting what they were seeing, which was, of course, nothing. No new episode, no announcement, no surprise drop. Just the same 8 episodes that had been there since New Year's Eve. But the lack of an episode at midnight didn't kill the theory immediately. Fans rationalised that maybe it would drop at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the same time all the other volumes had released. That's when the real release would happen. Netflix was just building suspense, they said. The Duffer Brothers were making us wait. So people kept refreshing, kept checking, kept posting on social media about their theories for why it hadn't appeared yet. Maybe Netflix was waiting for a specific moment. Maybe there was a countdown hidden somewhere. Maybe. Then around 10 a.m. Eastern Time, on January 7th, something did happen. But it wasn't what fans wanted. Netflix updated all of the official Stranger Things social media accounts. The bios, which had previously said various things about the show, were changed to a single, definitive statement. All episodes of Stranger Things are now playing. All caps, no ambiguity. Every single episode that exists is already available. There is no episode 9 coming. The series is complete. It was Netflix's way of gently, or not so gently, telling everyone to calm down and accept that the show was over. The response on social media was immediate and divided. Some people felt vindicated that they'd never believed the theory in the first place. Others were genuinely devastated. And a surprising number of people simply refused to accept it. The denial was honestly quite something to watch unfold. People argued that the social media update was part of the misdirection, that Netflix was trying to throw them off the scent before the big reveal at 8 p.m. Some claimed that the bio change proved Netflix was paying attention to the theory, which meant the theory had merit. It was a masterclass in confirmation bias, where every piece of evidence, even evidence that directly contradicted the theory, was twisted to support it. When 8 p.m. Eastern Time rolled around and still no episode appeared, that's when the disappointment really set in. Thousands of people had genuinely believed episode 9 was coming. They'd organised their evenings around it, gathered with friends to watch it, prepared snacks and drinks for what they thought would be a historic television moment. And instead, there was just nothing. The site did crash again though, which was almost funny in a tragic sort of way. So many people were refreshing the Stranger Things page at 8 p.m. that Netflix struggled to keep up with the traffic. But there was no new episode causing the crash this time. It was purely people checking for something that didn't exist. Social media after 8 p.m. was a proper roller coaster of emotions. You had people posting jokes and memes about how they'd been fooled. You had people posting angry rants about wasted time and emotional manipulation. You had people trying to comfort others who were genuinely upset. And you had a core group of believers who absolutely refused to give up. That's when the theory pivoted. If January 7th wasn't the date, maybe it was January 12th instead. There had to be a reason why January 12th kept coming up in discussions, fans argued. Maybe that was the real release date all along, and everyone had simply miscalculated. And to be fair, there was a reason January 12th was significant. Netflix had announced something for that date, something real and confirmed. But it wasn't episode 9. It was a behind-the-scenes documentary called One Last Adventure, The Making of Stranger Things 5. The documentary announcement had actually come before January 7th, but in the fervour of Conformity Gate, loads of people had either missed it or chosen to interpret it differently. Some fans convinced themselves that One Last Adventure was actually code for episode 9. Others thought the documentary would premiere alongside episode 9, both dropping on January 12th. A few even speculated that the documentary itself would be structured like an episode and would reveal the true ending through behind-the-scenes footage. The mental gymnastics required to keep the theory alive at this point were honestly impressive. Every piece of evidence that contradicted Conformity Gate was either ignored, reinterpreted, or incorporated into an even more elaborate version of the theory. It's what happens when people become emotionally invested in an outcome and can't accept that they might be wrong. To be honest, I felt a bit sorry for the hardcore believers at this point. They'd put so much time and energy into analysing the finale, compiling evidence, discussing theories, and genuinely convincing themselves that episode 9 was real. Finding out it wasn't must have been properly gutting, especially for people who were already disappointed with the actual ending. But January 12th was still coming, and with it, at least something new in the Stranger Things universe, even if it wasn't what fans had hoped for. You'd think that Netflix or the Duffer Brothers would have jumped in earlier to shut this down, but actually, they stayed pretty quiet for a while. And that silence, intentional or not, only fueled the conspiracy theories even more. The first real statement from the Duffer Brothers came in an interview with Variety that was published in late 2025, around the time of the finale's release. Matt Duffer was asked directly about the ending and whether there was any ambiguity built into it. His response was pretty clear. "This is a complete story. It's done." Ross Duffer added something that, in hindsight, feels quite poignant. "When we finish a season, there's always the safety net of, oh, we get to go back to these characters," he said. "That is going to be the hardest thing to adjust to when it's January 1st and it's like, oh, we don't have that." According to the interview, he was specifically talking about January 1st, 2026, the day after the finale aired, as the moment when they'd fully realise the show was over. For Conformity Gate believers, that January 1st reference became another clue. Why mention that specific date unless something was happening after it? Maybe January 7th, maybe January 12th. But in reality, Ross was just talking about the emotional experience of finishing something they'd worked on for a decade. In another interview with Capital Buzz, the Duffer Brothers were asked if they'd shot multiple endings for the series, the way some shows do to prevent leaks or keep options open. Matt's response was brilliant. "Oh no, I love when I hear people do that, but I'm like, how do you have the time? Oh my God, the energy to A, write it, and then shoot it. Are you crazy? No. That's, are you crazy? No is such a definitive rejection of the idea that there's a secret alternate ending sitting somewhere in a vault. They barely had time to shoot one ending, let alone multiple versions. But again, for people who wanted to believe, even that denial could be interpreted as misdirection. What's really interesting is why Netflix and the Duffer Brothers chose not to address Conformity Gate more directly in the days leading up to January 7th. They could have posted a statement saying, "There is no episode 9, please stop crashing our servers." But they didn't. They let the theory run its course. I think there's probably a few reasons for that. First, engaging with conspiracy theories often just makes them bigger. If you deny something, believers will say you're lying or covering it up. If you ignore it, it eventually dies on its own when the predicted event doesn't happen. Second, from a business perspective, having thousands of people obsessively checking Netflix and talking about Stranger Things non-stop was free publicity. And third, maybe they were a bit amused by the whole thing. The cast members who did comment on it seemed genuinely surprised by the scale of the theory. Charlie Heaton, who plays Jonathan Byers, was asked about it on a red carpet and admitted, "I'm not on social media, but my friend just told me about this. It's kind of insane." His tone suggested he found it both flattering and a bit overwhelming that fans cared enough to construct such elaborate theories. Other cast members stayed silent, which was probably wise. Anything they said would be picked apart for hidden meanings and clues. Even a simple "the show is over" could be interpreted as them playing along with the misdirection. What the Duffer Brothers did discuss openly in various interviews over the years was how the ending had evolved during production. They've been quite candid about the fact that Season 5's ending isn't exactly what they'd originally planned when they started the show. In a 2018 book called Stranger Things, Worlds Turned Upside Down, Ross Duffer revealed something quite significant about Season 1. 11 was going to sacrifice herself to save the day, he said. That was always the end game. But once we realised that the show was potentially going to go on longer than one season, we needed to leave it more up in the air, because deep down, we knew the show just wouldn't really work without 11. And at that point, we knew how special Millie was. If there was going to be more Stranger Things, 11 had to come back. So they'd already faked 11's death once, changed their planned ending because they wanted the show to continue, and admitted to leaving things deliberately ambiguous. Is it any wonder fans thought they might do it again? The difference, of course, is that Season 5 was always going to be the final season. The Duffer Brothers had confirmed that multiple times over the years. According to a Variety interview, Netflix executive Matthew Thunel said, "So much of what they had in their head in 2015 is what we're now seeing play out as we come to the end of this series. They'd planned for 5 seasons from the beginning, even if the details had shifted along the way. That 5-season plan was always the safety net for why there couldn't be an episode 9 or a secret continuation. This was it. The story they'd mapped out in 2015 was complete. Each of Season 4's episodes had cost roughly $30 million to produce, according to reports, and Season 5 was presumably similar or higher. The idea that they'd secretly filmed an entire extra episode without anyone knowing, or that they'd surprise release something after the supposed finale, just didn't make financial or logistical sense. But here's the thing about conspiracy theories. They don't have to make practical sense. They just have to make emotional sense to the people who believe them. And for fans who were disappointed with the ending, who wanted 11 to come back, who wanted a different resolution, Conformity Gate made perfect emotional sense. The official denials from Netflix and the Duffer Brothers were clear, consistent, and unambiguous. But they came too late to stop the theory from spreading. And for some fans, no amount of official statements would be enough to kill the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was one more episode waiting. Instead of episode 9, what we're actually getting on January 12th, 2026, is something that might answer a lot of questions, just not in the way fans expected. Netflix announced a feature-length documentary called One Last Adventure, The Making of Stranger Things 5. And honestly, it looks like it could be quite special, even if it's not the hidden finale people wanted. The documentary is directed by Martina Radwan, and it's set to release on January 12th at 12 a.m. Pacific Time, which is 3 a.m. Eastern. So if you're on the East Coast and absolutely desperate to watch it the second it drops, you'll need to stay up quite late or wake up very early. Most people will probably just watch it on January 12th at a reasonable hour, but I'm sure there are dedicated fans who'll be up at 3 a.m. What makes this documentary potentially interesting is its scope. According to the official synopsis from Netflix, it's a sweeping behind-the-scenes chronicle that follows the cast, creators, and crew as they bring the final season to life and say goodbye to the show that changed them forever. So we're not just getting a quick promotional piece or a half-hour featurette. This is meant to be comprehensive, covering the full production cycle of Season 5. The Duffer Brothers have actually been quite open about what inspired them to make this documentary. In a statement released alongside the announcement, they mentioned being inspired by the behind-the-scenes content from the Lord of the Rings films. If you've ever watched the extended editions of those movies, you'll know they come with absolutely massive documentaries that cover every aspect of production. Some of those documentaries are nearly as long as the films themselves. The Duffer Brothers said they wanted to bring that same level of detail and care to documenting the end of Stranger Things. They wanted to pull back the curtain on how everything came together, show the creative decisions that went into crafting the finale, and give fans a chance to see the emotional reality of ending something they'd all worked on for nearly a decade. What's particularly compelling about the documentary, based on the trailer that's been released, is how much emotional weight it carries. There's footage of the cast doing their final table reads, which apparently got quite tearful. Millie Bobby Brown, Finn Wolfhard, and the rest of the core cast have been playing these characters since they were children. Growing up on camera, forming genuine friendships, spending nearly a third of their lives in Hawkins, Indiana, saying goodbye to all that is properly emotional. The trailer shows several cast members breaking down while reading their final lines. There's a shot of what looks like the entire cast and crew gathered together for the last day of filming, and you can see people crying, hugging, looking absolutely wrecked. It's the kind of raw emotion you don't usually get to see in polished promotional material. One of the things the documentary promises to address is the polarizing finale and the decisions behind it. According to the trailer, we'll get to see the Duffer Brothers discussing how they approached Eleven's fate, why they chose the ending they did, and how they struggled with certain creative choices. For fans who felt unsatisfied or confused by the finale, this might provide some closure or at least some understanding of the thought process behind it. There's apparently footage of the Duffers arguing about plot points, working through different versions of scenes, and grappling with how to end a story that meant so much to so many people. That creative process is genuinely fascinating to watch, especially when the stakes are this high. Netflix hasn't confirmed the exact runtime of the documentary, but based on what they've said about it being feature length and the amount of ground it's supposed to cover, most people are expecting it to be somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours, possibly even longer. Given that the final episode itself was over 2 hours, it wouldn't be surprising if the documentary matched or exceeded that length. Fun fact, the Duffers have mentioned in interviews that they filmed an absolutely staggering amount of behind-the-scenes footage throughout Season 5's production. They had cameras rolling during table reads, on set between takes, during rehearsals, in the editing room, everywhere. They were documenting everything because they knew this was the last time they'd get to do it. What I find really interesting is that the documentary will apparently include footage of actors filming their final scenes before the table read even happened. Nell Fisher, who plays Holly Wheeler, had apparently shot some of her finale scenes before she'd even read the full script, which must have been quite surreal. The Duffers managed the shooting schedule so that every actor's last day on set was genuinely their character's final scene, which is a lovely touch that probably made the emotional impact even more intense. To be honest, while this isn't the episode 9 that Conformity Gate believers wanted, it might actually be more valuable in some ways. A secret extra episode would just be more story, more plot, more questions and answers. But a documentary that shows you how the creators approached the ending, why they made the choices they did, and what it meant to everyone involved, that's a different kind of closure. It won't satisfy everyone, obviously. If you hated the ending, watching people talk about why they made the ending you hated probably won't change your mind. But for people who are confused or unsatisfied, but not outright hostile, getting that insight into the creative process might help make peace with how the story ended. The documentary drops on January 12th, which is exactly where the Conformity Gate theory had pivoted to after January 7th came and went. Some fans are still holding out hope that there might be something hidden in the documentary, some announcement at the end, some surprise reveal. But realistically, One Last Adventure is exactly what it appears to be, a heartfelt goodbye to a show that defined a generation. Even though the main series is over, the Stranger Things universe is actually expanding in some pretty cool ways. Netflix and the Duffer Brothers aren't ready to leave Hawkins behind completely, which honestly makes sense when you've got one of the biggest franchises in streaming history. There are multiple projects in development, some already quite far along, others still in early stages. The first one we're getting is an animated series called Stranger Things Tales from 85, and it's set to release sometime in 2026. No exact date yet, but the fact that it's coming this year is pretty exciting. The show is going to be set between seasons 2 and 3 of the original series, filling in some of that time gap we never got to see. What's really interesting about Tales from 85 is that it's going to follow the original characters: 11, Mike Wheeler, Dustin Henderson, Will Byers, Lucas Sinclair, and Max Mayfield, but with entirely new voice actors. So we're getting the same characters and the same stories, just not performed by Millie Bobby Brown, Finn Wolfhard, and the rest of the crew we've come to know. That's a bit of a bittersweet situation, because part of what made those characters so special was the performances, but I suppose the original cast has aged out of being able to convincingly play their younger selves. The animation style, based on what we've seen in promotional material and the official trailer that dropped back in November 2025, looks absolutely gorgeous. It's this really vibrant, detailed style that captures the 80s aesthetic of the show, while also giving it a fresh visual identity. The colours are bold, the character designs are instantly recognisable, and there's this lovely attention to period detail in the backgrounds and settings. According to the official description, Tales from 85 will follow the kids as they work to unravel mysteries of the Upside Down during that in-between period. So we're getting new Upside Down content, new monster encounters potentially, and new character development for a time period that the main show mostly skipped over. It's canon to the main series, which means everything that happens in the animated show actually counts toward the larger story. I mean, think about it. Between the end of Season 2 and the beginning of Season 3, there's quite a bit of time where life presumably went back to something resembling normal for the kids. But we know from the show that the Upside Down was never truly closed, that things were still happening beneath the surface. Tales from 85 gets to explore all of that without having to work around the actors' current ages or scheduling conflicts. The Duffer Brothers are involved in the project as executive producers, though they're not handling the day-to-day writing and production. That's being led by a team of people who worked on the original series, so there's at least some continuity in terms of who's telling these stories. Then there's the unnamed live-action spin-off, which is still quite mysterious. We don't have a title, we don't have a release date, we don't even have confirmed casting yet. What we do know, based on interviews the Duffer Brothers have given, is that it's going to be set in the Stranger Things universe, but will feature an entirely new time period and a completely new set of characters. The Duffer Brothers have confirmed they'll be involved in this project, but they won't be acting as showrunners. After nearly a decade of running Stranger Things, they're ready to step back a bit and let someone else take the lead on this one. They'll still be there as executive producers, helping guide the vision and making sure it fits within the established universe, but the day-to-day creative decisions will fall to whoever ends up running the show. What's particularly interesting is that the Duffers have said this spin-off will answer some lingering questions from the main series. Specifically, they've mentioned that it will delve into what happened with Henry Creel in that cave, the event that gave him his powers and connected him to the Mind Flayer in Dimension X. That's one of the biggest unresolved mysteries from Season 5, so having a whole spin-off dedicated to exploring that backstory could be really compelling. In an interview, Matt Duffer said, "I do want to explain, just because people's expectations go in certain directions, the spin-off is going to delve into that and explain that, and you're going to understand it." So it sounds like they're aware that the finale left questions unanswered, and they're planning to address at least some of them in future projects. The spin-off being set in a different time period opens up loads of possibilities. It could be a prequel showing the early days of Hawkins' lab and the experiments that led to the Upside Down being discovered. It could be set in the future, showing what happens to Hawkins years after the events of Season 5. It could even jump around in time, telling a story that spans multiple eras. We just don't know yet. To be honest, I'm quite curious to see what they do with it. Creating a spin-off in an established universe is tricky because you want it to feel connected, but also stand on its own. If it relies too heavily on knowledge from the main series, new viewers won't be able to jump in. But if it strays too far from what made Stranger Things special, it risks feeling like a completely different show that just happens to share a universe. There's also a book spin-off that's already out, which some people might have missed in all the finale chaos. It's called Stranger Things, One Way or Another, and it's written by Caitlin Schneiderhan. The book centres on Nancy Wheeler, which makes sense given that she's one of the most popular characters and her investigative journalist angle lends itself well to book format. The story follows Nancy as she investigates weird events happening around Hawkins with the help of Robin. What makes it particularly relevant is that it's set during the time jump between seasons 4 and 5. There was a significant gap there, several years if I remember correctly, and the book fills in some of what Nancy was up to during that period. It's considered canon, so if you're interested in Nancy's character development and how she got from where she was at the end of season 4 to where she is in season 5, the book apparently provides that context. And then there's The First Shadow, which is actually a Broadway play that's been running since before season 5 even aired. It's a prequel that explores the origins of some of the show's mythology, focusing on younger versions of characters we know from the main series. The play is officially canon according to the Duffer Brothers, though the show itself never fully embraced it or incorporated its revelations into the main narrative. That disconnect between the play and the show has been a point of frustration for some fans. If it's canon, why doesn't the show reference it? If it's important to understanding the full story, why do you have to see a Broadway production to get that information? It's one of those situations where the expanded universe feels a bit disconnected from the core product. But taken all together, these projects show that Netflix and the Duffer Brothers are committed to keeping the Stranger Things universe alive, even after the main story has concluded. Whether that's a good thing or just a way to milk a successful franchise for all it's worth, probably depends on how well these spin-offs and expansions are executed. What's really fascinating about Conformity Gate isn't just the evidence fans found, it's why they wanted so desperately for it to be true. And I think understanding that psychology is actually more interesting than any of the supposed clues or Easter eggs, because it tells you something about how we engage with stories in 2026, and what happens when beloved narratives end in ways that don't match our expectations. First off, the emotional investment here is absolutely massive. Stranger Things premiered in July 2016. That's nearly a decade ago. People who were 12 years old when they first watched the show are now in their early 20s. The actors themselves were children when they started, and now they're adults. For a huge portion of the audience, Stranger Things has been a constant in their lives through some of the most formative years a person can experience. When you grow up with a show like that, the characters stop feeling like fictional constructs and start feeling like people you actually know. You've spent more time with Eleven, Mike, Dustin, and the rest of the gang than you have with some of your real-life friends. You've watched them go through trauma, triumph, first loves, losses, coming of age. That creates an emotional bond that's genuinely quite powerful. So when the finale gives you an ending where Eleven might be dead, where Mike is stuck in grief while everyone else moves on, where major questions go unanswered, that hurts. It feels personal. And the natural human response to that kind of hurt is to look for a way to fix it, to make it better, to find hope that maybe the story isn't really over in such an unsatisfying way. Conformity Gate offered exactly that hope. It said, don't worry, this isn't the real ending. The ending you wanted, the one where Eleven lives and everyone gets proper closure and the themes are honoured, is still coming. Just wait a bit longer. Have faith. The Duffer Brothers wouldn't let you down like this. That's incredibly seductive if you're already disappointed. It's much easier to believe in a conspiracy theory that promises a better outcome than it is to accept that the story you loved ended in a way you didn't like. But there's also a broader cultural context here that made Conformity Gate feel plausible. Modern audiences, especially those who've grown up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have been trained to look for hidden meanings, post-credits scenes, and surprise reveals. The MCU made a whole art form out of rewarding viewers who paid close attention, who stayed through the credits, who noticed the tiny Easter eggs planted throughout films. That style of storytelling has influenced how people watch everything now. We don't just passively consume media anymore. We analyse it, pick it apart, look for clues about what's coming next. And shows like Stranger Things, which are absolutely packed with references, callbacks, and carefully planted foreshadowing, encourage that kind of engagement. So when fans started spotting what looked like inconsistencies or hidden messages in the finale, their instinct wasn't to dismiss them as mistakes. Their instinct was to assume they were clues, because that's what modern storytelling has taught us to expect. There's also precedent for fan theories actually being true. The Snyder Cut is the perfect example. For years, fans insisted that there was a director's cut of Justice League that was completely different from the theatrical release, that it was better and more complete, and that it deserved to be released. Most people thought they were mental. And then, in 2021, it actually happened. The Snyder Cut was real, it was released, and the fans were vindicated. If that can happen, if a secret 4-hour version of a film can exist and eventually come out, why couldn't there be a secret 9th episode of Stranger Things? The precedent was there. Fan campaigns had proven they could work. Of course, there are also examples of fan theories that turned out to be completely wrong. Game of Thrones fans convinced themselves the final season would be better than it was, that certain character arcs would resolve differently, that the ending they got wasn't the real ending. That didn't work out. Sherlock fans spent years convinced there was a secret 4th episode to Series 4 that would fix all the perceived problems. That never materialized either. But people tend to remember the successes and forget the failures, especially when they're emotionally invested in the outcome. Fun fact, the Byler shippers, fans who wanted to see a romantic relationship between Mike and Will, played a surprisingly significant role in spreading conformity gate. One of the prominent accounts that initially pushed the theory was apparently run by Byler fans who were disappointed that the show had confirmed Mike wasn't gay and that he and Will wouldn't end up together. For them, the theory offered hope that maybe the epilogue where Will had a boyfriend, but Mike was grieving, 11 wasn't the final word on their relationship. That's not to say all conformity gate believers were Byler shippers, or that the theory was just about shipping. But it does show how different fan communities with different desires and disappointments all latched onto the same conspiracy theory because it offered them what they wanted. Social media obviously amplified everything. A theory that might have stayed contained to a few Reddit threads in 2010 can now go viral across TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram in a matter of hours. Once enough people are talking about something, it gains a kind of legitimacy just through sheer volume. If thousands of people believe it, surely there must be something to it, right? The algorithm tends to show you more of what you're already interested in too. So if you watched one video about conformity gate, you'd get recommended 10 more. Your feed became an echo chamber where everyone agreed the theory was real, which made it even harder to maintain skepticism. To be honest, I think there's a line between healthy fan engagement and conspiracy thinking, and conformity gate definitely crossed it for some people. Analysing a show you love, discussing theories with other fans, getting excited about possibilities, that's all great. That's what fandoms are for. But when you start refusing to accept reality, when you interpret every piece of evidence to fit your preferred narrative, no matter how contradictory it is, when you can't let go even after the creators themselves tell you you're wrong, that's when it becomes a problem. The really tragic thing is that conformity gate, for all its creativity and passion, probably made some fans enjoy the actual ending less than they would have otherwise. Instead of sitting with the finale, processing it, maybe coming to terms with it over time, people spent weeks convinced it was fake. And when that turned out not to be true, they had to deal with both the disappointment of the original ending and the disappointment of learning there was no episode 9. Double the letdown. To be fair to the conformity gate believers, the finale did leave some pretty significant questions unanswered. And this is where I think it's important to separate the conspiracy theory from legitimate criticism, because not everyone who was disappointed with the ending was being unreasonable. Some of the frustration came from genuinely unresolved plot threads that the show either glossed over or deliberately left ambiguous. The biggest one, obviously, is Eleven's fate. Is she alive or is she dead? The finale is maddeningly unclear about this. We see her sacrifice herself to close the rifts. We see Mike holding her as she appears to be dying, and then we get nothing. The epilogue shows Mike grieving, which suggests she's gone, but it never explicitly confirms it. There's no funeral, no gravestone, no definitive statement from any character that she's actually dead. This is very different from the season 1 fake out, where 11 dissolved into particles, and then we got that final scene of Hopper leaving Eggos in the woods. That ending said, she appeared to die, but here's a hint she might still be alive. The season 5 ending doesn't even give us that much. It's just, she might be dead, Mike is sad, moving on. Some fans argue that the ambiguity is intentional and beautiful, that it allows viewers to decide for themselves what they believe happened. Death doesn't always come with clear answers in real life, and maybe the show is honouring that reality. Other fans argue that after 9 years of investment in Eleven's character, we deserved a clear answer about whether she survived. I can see both sides, honestly, but what makes it particularly frustrating is that the show has confirmed the Duffer Brothers know what happened to 11. They've said in interviews that they have a definitive answer about her fate. They just chose not to share it with the audience. So it's not that they don't know, they deliberately withheld that information, which feels different from genuine ambiguity. Then there's the whole business with Vecna and the cave. What exactly happened when Henry Creel went into that cave as a child? How did it give him his powers? What's the connection between him and the Mind Flayer? Season 5 touched on this, but never fully explained it, leaving one of the show's central mysteries partially unresolved. According to the Duffer Brothers, this will be addressed in the upcoming live-action spin-off, which is fine, I suppose, but it does feel a bit odd to leave a major plot point from your main series unresolved, so you can explore it in a spin-off. It's the kind of thing that makes cynical viewers wonder if questions were deliberately left unanswered to justify future projects, rather than because it served the story. The relationship between Jonathan and Nancy is another one that loads of people found unsatisfying. The show spent years building up this complicated love triangle between Nancy, Jonathan, and Steve. By season 5, it seemed like the show was leaning toward Nancy ending up with Steve, given their chemistry and character development. But then the epilogue just doesn't resolve it. Nancy is pursuing journalism, which is great, but we never get a clear answer about her romantic life or how that whole situation settled. Some fans are fine with that, arguing that Nancy's story was always about more than romance, and she doesn't need to be defined by which boy she ends up with. Other fans feel cheated out of a resolution to a storyline the show itself spent multiple seasons developing. There's also the time jump between seasons 4 and 5, which apparently spanned several years. The show skipped over that entire period, and whilst the book, one way or another, fills in some gaps for Nancy, we don't really know what happened to most of the other characters during that time. How did relationships evolve? What other encounters with the Upside Down might have occurred? How did Hawkins recover, or not recover, from the events of season 4? The Broadway play, The First Shadow, supposedly addresses some of this, but again, expecting viewers to see a stage production to understand important backstory feels like asking a lot. Not everyone can get to Broadway, and not everyone who watches Netflix is going to track down additional media to fill in gaps the show itself left open. What's interesting is comparing how Season 1 handled Eleven's apparent death versus how Season 5 did. In Season 1, the ambiguity felt earned, because it was always meant to lead somewhere. The Duffer Brothers knew they were getting a second season, and they knew 11 would be back. The uncertainty was a cliffhanger, not an ending. In Season 5, the ambiguity around 11's fate doesn't lead anywhere, because there is nowhere for it to lead. The show is over, so it's not a cliffhanger, it's just unresolved, and there's a significant difference between those two things. Some of the unanswered questions might actually be answered in future spin-offs and projects. The animated series could address some character moments from the time period between seasons 2 and 3. The live-action spin-off will supposedly explain the Henry Creel mystery. The documentary might provide creative context that helps certain decisions make more sense. But relying on supplementary material to complete your main story is always going to frustrate some portion of your audience. People who just want to watch the show itself, who aren't interested in buying books or seeing plays or tracking down every spin-off, deserve to get a complete story from the main series. To be honest, I think the Duffer Brothers were caught between wanting to leave some things open for interpretation and wanting to set up future projects in the universe. Those two goals don't always align well, Ambiguity for its own sake can be beautiful, but ambiguity that exists because you're saving answers for a spin-off feels calculated. The question of whether these unanswered threads justify something like conformity gate is debatable. I don't think plot holes or unresolved questions mean there's a secret episode coming, but I do think they explain why fans were so ready to believe in one. When a story doesn't give you closure, you'll look for it elsewhere, even if that elsewhere is a conspiracy theory. Whether you believed in conformity gate or thought it was mental from the start, there's no denying it's become a pretty significant moment in TV fandom history. And I think what it reveals about modern fan culture is actually quite interesting, regardless of whether the theory itself had any merit. First off, the scale of it was absolutely massive. This wasn't just a handful of people on Reddit speculating. We're talking about thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people across multiple platforms, all convinced that episode 9 was real. The theory crashed Netflix multiple times. It dominated social media for over a week. Major entertainment outlets were writing articles about it. That's cultural impact, even if the theory turned out to be wrong. What Conformity Gate showed is just how passionate and engaged modern fandoms can be. People cared enough about Stranger Things to spend hours analysing every frame of the finale, compiling evidence, creating detailed theories, and genuinely investing themselves in the idea that there was more story to come. That level of dedication is honestly quite beautiful, even when it crosses into conspiracy territory, but it also highlights some of the downsides of how we consume media now. The inability to just sit with an ending, to accept that a story has concluded even if it didn't conclude the way we wanted, seems to be getting harder for people. There's this expectation that if enough fans complain or theorize or demand something different, creators will give it to them. And sometimes that works. The Snyder Cut proves it can, but more often it doesn't. Streaming has fundamentally changed how we think about endings too. In the network television era, when a show ended, it ended. You got your finale, you either liked it or you didn't, and that was that. There was no social media campaign to get a different ending. There was no analysing every frame for hidden clues. You just moved on. Now, with everything living forever on streaming platforms, with creators able to go back and add content or release special editions or create spin-offs, endings feel more negotiable. They don't have the finality they used to. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does create this expectation that stories are never truly over. I mean, think about it. Stranger Things itself is a perfect example. The main series has ended, but we're getting an animated spin-off, a live-action spin-off, a documentary, books, potentially more projects beyond that. So in a sense, the story isn't over. The universe continues. Is it any wonder fans thought there might be one more episode when the Duffer Brothers themselves aren't ready to leave Hawkins behind? The positive side of all this is that we have incredibly passionate, creative fan communities who genuinely love the stories they engage with. The negative side is that sometimes that passion tips into an inability to accept disappointment or let things end. What's going to be interesting is whether this becomes a pattern. Will every major series finale from now on spawn conspiracy theories about secret episodes? Will creators start having to explicitly debunk theories before they even form? Or will Conformity Gate be remembered as a unique moment, a perfect storm of fan disappointment, ambiguous storytelling, and social media amplification? My guess is we'll see more of this, but probably not at this scale. Stranger Things was uniquely positioned for this kind of theory because of its themes, its history of fake-outs, and the sheer size of its fan base. Most shows won't have all those factors aligning. As for whether Conformity Gate is completely dead, even now, there are probably some die-hard believers holding out hope. Maybe the documentary will reveal something. Maybe the spin-offs will somehow continue the story in a way that validates their theories. Conspiracy theories rarely die completely. They just evolve. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's deep dive into Conformity Gate and the wild conspiracy theory that convinced thousands of people Episode 9 was real. Just to recap, there is no secret 9th episode. The series ended with episode 8 on December 31st, 2025. What is coming on January 12th is the documentary One Last Adventure, The Making of Stranger Things 5, which will give us behind-the-scenes insights into how the finale was made, even if it's not the hidden episode fans wanted. The Stranger Things universe will continue with the animated series, Tales from 85, and eventually a live-action spin-off. So there's still plenty of content coming for those who aren't ready to leave Hawkins behind. If you've got thoughts on Conformity Gate, whether you believed it or thought it was absolutely mental, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. But until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.